Alrighty.
Hello, everyone.
Hey,
Hello.
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 Uh, I think as folks are joining, Megan Byrne is going to share. Someone from Jessica from the CLF Seattle Hub had the great idea to share a poll just to get a sense of who's joining today. And so that should pop up as you join. So everyone can take a minute to answer it while everyone's signing on. So I think we've got a pretty good number of folks already on, just said 100. So I think yeah, feel free to keep answering that for a few minutes, and then I'll end it as after we give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to jump into today. So can you go to the next slide, Lindsay? Oh, actually, one after that. Just a brief overview. So first of all, thanks everyone for joining, and for those of you who lead hubs who helped coordinate this today. It was really great. I sent this out less than a month ago, or about a month ago, and we had a really fast turnaround of people really excited. And thanks to CLF Ohio for suggesting this idea. So we've got, I actually don't know because it's a long answer in the poll, how many hubs, but I think around 10 hubs are joining today. So this is fun to see everyone from across at least the country. Today what we're going to do, so we'll share a little bit about ourselves on the panel, and then we're going to do a walkthrough of the major updates and then focus on the embodied carbon credits for LEEDv5, and we'll have a lot of time for questions. So we have some Q&A prepared that Lindsay Watkins will be our moderator today. We have some questions prepared, but we also are excited for the opportunity to respond to your questions. So if you could use the chat to add questions, then Lindsay will be able to potentially integrate them as we go. Since we don't have the Q&A function on this one, it might be a little difficult to find the questions if we're chatting and questioning. So just be a little cognizant of that. Apologies if we miss your question if it gets buried. And I think with that, we can switch over to intros if you want to go back, Lindsay. Kelly, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Roberts. I'm the Regional Director for the Southeast and Managing Director of the Atlanta office for Walter P. Moore. I also co-lead sustainable design practices at Walter P. Moore for the Structures Group, and I was part of the MR tag that helped write this LEEDv5 language.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Fritsch. I'm here in Boston, Director of Sustainability at Elkis Manfredi Architects, and I'm also a member of the TAG that helped write a few of these version 5 credits.
And I'm Megan Lewis. I'm a program director, or the program director at Carbon Leadership Forum, not to be confused with the excellent Megan Byrne, who you all know and love from coordinating our hubs. And I'm also a member of the LEED MR tag.
Hi, I'm Annie Kell. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Rocky Mountain Hub for CLF, and I'm the Sustainability Services Delivery Lead for Burns McDonnell. I'm based in Denver, and I'm my first year on the MR tag.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay Watkins. I'm over in Boise, Idaho, and I am Senior Associate of Decarbonization at U.S. Green Building Council. I'm super excited to present this kind of green build repeat for all of you today and talk with these lovely folks. I'm materials and resources staff, so I've gotten the opportunity to help work on these credits with everyone here. Alrighty. So with that, we're going to jump right in. We've got a couple of overview slides here. So this is the LEEDv5 scorecard. Hopefully you all have looked at it, but this one might be a little different than what you've seen, as it's sorted by our 3 impact areas for V5. So that's decarbonization, quality of life, and ecological conservation and restoration. And one thing you'll notice that I particularly love about the materials and resources credits is that they bridge the gap between all 3 of these impact areas, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail as we move forward. But it is great to see materials being thought about as multi-attribute and seeing the embodied carbon thread driven all the way through. So a couple of key highlights. LEEDv5 is really about building carbon literacy in our design communities. And we'll talk about the new prerequisite, which I'm sure you all know about, being carbon nerds like myself. Oh. Also, if everybody could stay on mute, we just have a little feedback there. But we have the new prerequisite, which it is required to perform carbon assessment. It's not required to have reductions, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of all that. But we really want everyone to be brought to the table in terms of understanding and quantifying embodied carbon, as well as how we find the data to compare. And so additionally, cradle to grave embodied carbon, we really want to start thinking about the entire life cycle of materials that we have in our buildings. And then one thing you'll also notice that's super exciting for us on the MR tag and MR staff is that we did get more points for the materials and resources credits in V5. So we're seeing a lot more opportunity for transformation, things like reuse and embodied carbon. So we're super thrilled to talk about that with you all today. And then a quick overview before we dive into the credits themselves. Really, the materials and resources credits are about supporting and promoting low embodied carbon, healthy materials, and circular economy across the whole product life cycle. This looks like targeting embodied carbon reductions for structure enclosure and hardscape, as well as promoting multi-attribute optimization across all building products. And you will see that in some awesome pilot credits that we have just published and some that are coming out in Q1 2026. One last thing before we get into the credits is that we have really worked to harmonize and align with the industry on all facets of materials and resources. So what this looks like in practice is the ECHO group that we have been a part of since the beginning. We have worked to align with the ECHO schema. So if you've looked at the ECHO schema, it will look super similar to the LEED reporting calculator, as well as things like aligning with the common materials framework for multi-attribute materials. And so with that, I'm gonna, I have one more slide here. This is our scorecard for materials and resources. And I just wanna point out that while we have credits that are directly targeted at embodied carbon and embodied carbon reductions, really that thread pulls all the way through the credit category. We see direct embodied carbon impacts here highlighted in yellow, and then indirect embodied carbon impacts in blue. And so what you really see is embodied carbon is all over the place. It is getting quantifications and reductions and being highlighted and rewarded in many different ways. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to dive into the credits themselves.
All right. So let's dive in here to the prerequisite. So as she mentioned, from the outset, one of the driving forces for LEEDv5 was to double down on embodied carbon. And there was very much a desire to get further faster and really encourage all project teams to engage in embodied carbon quantification and reduction. That's ultimately, the impetus for this prerequisite. It's the first time in LEED that all projects will be required to do this. And ultimately, the goal, as Lindsay mentioned, is to build carbon literacy across the entire AEC industry. The prerequisite mandates that projects analyze the embodied carbon impacts of key material categories, including structure, enclosure, and hardscape, focusing on life cycle stages A1 to A3. The materials covered include asphalt, concrete, structural, masonry, steel, insulation, aluminum, wood composites, cladding, and glass. And projects must identify the top 3 sources of embodied carbon and then describe strategies considered to reduce these hotspots. This is a really big and major shift towards early stage carbon awareness and design, so bringing it to the forefront on all of our projects. It's also a major shift to integrating LCA thinking from concept through design and construction. And one thing that's going to be a change for those that have pursued the Building Lifecycle Impact Reduction Credit in the past is that the MR credit that included a whole building life cycle assessment, that credit, it's that this new prerequisite and credit will include hardscape materials. And part of the motivation, in addition to general carbon reduction for that, is to bring more people to the table in this discussion, the civil engineer, the landscape architect. Hopefully, this will bring a lot more people into our discussion. I think you can go to the next slide.
Thanks. I'm going to dive in now to the Reduce Embodied Carbon credit. So this is the largest credit in terms of points and also has 3 different options for how you can pursue embodied carbon reductions. So as Kelly just explained, the prerequisite already includes an assessment. So this is where you're going to go beyond that especially for option 1 and 2 to get reductions. So the first option is whole building LCA. So this one you'll need to conduct a cradle to grave or A through C assessment of the project's structure, enclosure, and hardscape at a minimum, and then compare those results to a baseline developed for the project. I'll show what that reporting looks like, because I think some of that language probably sounds pretty similar other than hardscape, but it's really exciting to see the update and what the reporting will look like for V5. This is a pathway where you can get the most points and also use the broadest range of strategies to reduce embodied carbon. And also a change is that in LEEDv5, you need to report 6 environmental impact categories, but only make reductions for global warming potential. Second, there's the EPD analysis option. So there are 2 paths within this option. The way that I think of these in terms of shorthand is that path 1 is the EC3 pilot credit approach, and path 2 is the bike clean approach. But to explain more about what that means, essentially the first path, you're again collecting your bill of materials quantities for structure, enclosure, and hardscape materials. This time you're using data from EPDs in order to, you likely were also using EPD data also for whole building LCA, but you're focusing on A1 through A3. And again, you have your quantities, and then your baseline is going to be CLF material baselines or other data sources, and you're comparing that to product-specific EPDs. But in path 1, you're looking across the entire project and getting an average there. So you likely could use a smaller range of materials where you're collecting those product EPDs and demonstrating reductions. Whereas in path 2, you're focusing on a smaller number of materials and collecting actual product EPD data for all of that material. So that'll make a little more sense, I think, when I show the points in a moment. And then the third option here is about tracking carbon emissions during construction activities. So you can get 1 point for doing that for the contractor and an additional point for contractor and subcontractor construction activities. Next slide. So this is looking at options 1 and 2, just how those points shake out. So as I said, you can see on the left here in blue, the whole building LCA, that's where you're going to get the most points. So up to a 50% plus reduction in global warming potential for 7 points. I think that's the additional priority point. And then for path 2, up to 4 points for the project average approach. And then for the sort of buy clean approach, again, where you're having to collect actual product EPDs for all of the materials in that category, which is that's a big data collection challenge, which is part of why you see that the points here are rewarded for the number of material categories where you're demonstrating that you're better than industry average. And then I'm just going to show a few screenshots of the Reduce Embodied Carbon calculator that's available online, because I think it helps visualize some of what this will look like. So if you go to the next one, so this is for option 1 for whole building LCA. So it will now be reporting by life cycle stage and system. So the structure, enclosure, and hardscape, those first 3 rows for the baseline and the proposed are required. But there's also, you see, interiors, services, and equipment and furnishings have rows if those are reported, which is great in terms of transparency. And then there's also below this, I didn't include, there's cells for reporting biogenic carbon separately, and there's different approaches for doing that, as that's not done consistently across tools. And also very exciting, as Lindsay already mentioned, this reporting aligns with the CLF, whole building LCA reporting template, and the ECHO schema. If you go to the next slide. This one's looking at option 2, so the EBD analysis. So you're seeing material quantity units. So you've got your bill of materials, and then you need to have baseline data to define the baseline case, and then actual data coming from product EBDs. So the most recent CLF material baselines report is currently one of the accepted data sources, which we're excited about. And CLF is actually currently working on a template to streamline use of the baselines for reporting. So we're just going to pre-populate a spreadsheet that makes it a little easier to convert units and add in that data. Next slide. And then this one is contractor reporting. I actually wasn't able to capture everything in the template, but you can see sort of who's the operator, fuel source, quantity, units, emissions factors there for option 3. And with that, I'll pass it off for the next credit.
So recapping, drawing back on the multi-attribute materials and the traits we want to see across all of our products is the Building Product Selection and Procurement Credit, formerly known as BPDO. The acronym is now BPSP. So this credit, again, is about seeking out multi-attribute products that go beyond single attribute. So asking manufacturers for products that consider and have product documentation for things like climate health, human health, ecosystem health, social health and equity, and circular economy. And if you are interested, we have in the resources section in the credit library, we have a very extensive document which explains each different criteria area listed here, as well as the 1, 2, and 3 levels that are associated with the points. And just to drive that home, we have this cute little graphic, which really displays that we want to be looking beyond products that think about just one thing and quantify just one aspect, because the future of products is really multi-attribute. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kristen.
All right, so I'm super excited about this credit. As we know, the best way to reduce embodied carbon is use what we already have. And now we have a credit focused purely on reuse. So option 1 is your basic building reuse. So maintaining the existing building structure, including floor decking, roof decking, and enclosure. And then we have an option 2 where you're identifying opportunities for materials, like procurement of materials. Can be on-site materials or off-site materials.
I want to try this.
And then
1 second.
looks like, and then we have if you have a project that has deconstruction or demolition in the scope, there's an option to do a salvage assessment and identify materials that can be retained on site or diverted off-site to off-site markets. So I find this is super exciting to finally have this in LEED. And I think we're, let's see, next slide. Can't remember what's next. Oh, that's it. We're already at panel questions. That's a pretty straightforward credit.
Okay, so with this, we're going to move into some panel questions. Feel free to start populating them in the chat, but we are going to start with the ones we have set up. So to start off, what is the change you are all most excited to see in V5 from the standpoint of embodied carbon? Kelly, you want to kick us off?
I'd be happy to. I am absolutely most excited about whole building life cycle assessment clearly being identified as the gold standard for carbon assessment and reduction. It's been allocated more points than the other pathways, and I think this encourages teams to at least try that pathway. What's great is that you can pursue multiple pathways at the same time. This is what I've been telling people when they're asking for my tips and hints for LEEDv5. It's to try all the pathways, from the outset, try them all. But I'm very happy that LCA is being rewarded the most points, because you're really just missing the boat if you're not attempting a whole building life cycle assessment. We really fought hard for whole building life cycle assessment to be prioritized. I'm really glad that's how it landed.
Well, I think I just kind of said it was reuse is my favorite thing to happen. I'm really, it's almost like watching your kid grow up. I'm really excited to see like what's going to happen in the next 5 years with reuse. Will this change the market? Will there be uptake? Will there be more reused materials? I'm hoping it's a value option, and then you'll also get LEED points for it. So I'm excited to see what happens.
And I'm going to go prereq. And I think for me, that's because there are still so many projects where it's just there's an intimidation factor there, I think, for doing actually any of the materials and resources credits. I have heard, especially outside of the US, where people say that projects will just try to avoid those credits. And as a prereq now, it's not avoidable for you to think about at least an initial assessment of your embodied carbon. So I'm really excited about that. And then I'm also I think just once you've done that assessment, people are much closer to doing the extra step of actually achieving reductions through the Reduce Embodied Carbon credit.
Hi. Well, first of all, thanks to you all, and thanks for having me on as like a bonus panelist. I kind of similar to Megan, I'm also really excited about the prerequisite, but specifically the inclusion of hardscape. I love, it can be a really impactful area, and I like that it is now required to be part of the assessment, as well as that push for the early strategy discussions. I think a lot of times these whole building LCAs can kind of get kicked down the road in design. And so having that documentation of, yes, we did have early analysis of where we can drive down some of our emissions is really great to have as part of a requirement.
Awesome. I love hearing that from practitioners, what they're most excited about. And I'll just add in one of my favorites, which is the contractor emissions tracking from the job site. I think it's so important that we bring in both contractors and subcontractors into this process because they are such an integral role of project delivery. So I'm really thrilled. And if you have an opportunity to check out the calculator, we have not only the kind of mandatory reporting framework and template, but we additionally have a template that contractors could give to their subs to say, hey, this is a super easy way for you to document your utility use and what equipment is on site. And so I'm really excited to see the data we get out of that and bringing everybody to the table. So in terms of process and people, when should teams start to discuss these embodied carbon credits if they're hoping to maximize points and reductions?
Yeah, I'll kick this off. In terms of process, with the prerequisite now in play, it's really more important than ever that project teams discuss embodied carbon assessments and plans for reductions earlier than they ever have before. In concept design, you should really start to define your reference building or baseline building, as well as your path to reducing embodied carbon, and then continue looking for carbon reductions and specifying materials to meet those goals as the project progresses. Of course, if you miss the boat in early design, you can pivot towards the EPD pathways to specify materials with EPDs and reductions from industry average, but you might have missed out on some system level reductions if you're later in your design. After all, if we look at the top opportunities for reduction, let's put up some of those common design interventions, I think is maybe the next slide. Yeah, like if we're looking at some of these design interventions, you can see that 1, 2, and 3 are off the table after you get too far in design, right? Reuse, right size, dematerialize, those have to be early conversations. If you try to do those later in the design process, it's going to be extremely difficult. So that leaves you with a lot of material optimization and sourcing options, because normally we're looking at system interventions just a lot earlier in design.
Yeah, I'd say, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, kind of building off that, I completely agree with earlier on, especially if you're wanting those significant interventions. If you can get those analysis done of like different structural overall systems early on, that can be really helpful, especially if those conversations are then had with the owner about cost impacts. I think a lot of times there's a perception that certain variations might be like a lot more expensive, and sometimes they don't shake out that way. I've had a number of projects run that way, and you can't present those interventions later in design. So really having those early conversations, and then also answering that people part of the question, making sure that you not only have your design team, especially architecture, structural, civil, as part of those early conversations, but also having the conversations with the owner or the owner's rep to have them understand the requirement behind this and also the potential beneficial impacts of reducing these elements and the embodied carbon on their project. And then lastly, there's also this, as you move through design and you get into specs and all that, there's an opportunity additionally to kind of standardize how you're integrating embodied carbon reductions in the design. So there's kind of another wave of really looking at this once you hit the spec stage. Because if you get this language into the specs, such as global warming potential limits or a certain sourcing of materials, it makes it a lot easier to kind of contractually hold the construction team to what you've placed into the design. So I think that's also a really critical piece that isn't always considered throughout the design phase.
Yeah, and I'll just add like something that's we're not used to doing or early enough is right sizing not just the building, but also getting our MEP to right size their systems. So I think that's something we're training people to do, is ask that question earlier as well. And then if you're working with an existing building, working with the contractor really early on a deconstruction plan and what pathways there are, what materials are there, and then what pathways are there for those materials, because you're going to need a lot of lead time for that.
Thanks so much for that. I think that's super helpful to everybody on the call. So what tools are available for achieving these credits and completing the prerequisite?
Yeah, I can speak broadly to this. So I think the examples here always feel tricky because these tools change and adapt so quickly. So I expect that to continue to happen as LEEDv5 has been out for a little longer, to be more, to make it easier for folks to use different tools. But sort of on the left here, you have the LCA carbon calculators earlier in design, super easy to use, where you have less information that's directly specific to your building, but gives you a general sense based on things like systems and square footage, quantity specific building tools. So those are the ones you're going to need a project specific bill of materials for the prereq and for path 1 or option 1 and 2 of the Reduce Embodied Carbon credits. You're going to need a quantity specific building tool. And one that I know is changing that I think will move on to this list, for example, is C-scale. So just another example of how this landscape keeps shifting. And then in terms of product selection and procurement, or if you're just really focusing on the EPD analysis, there's also a suite of tools there like EC3, Material Compass, and EcoPortal. And I'd love to hear from firms like Kristen and others what tools you're using.
Yeah, in general, I mean, it is changing, but right now we're treating it really similarly to how we treated the AIA 2030 commitment, where we go into the zero tool early on and figure out our baseline and then what our target should be. And so we're using C-scale to do that for both operational and embodied carbon. And then as the design gets refined and we're using Tally personally in our office. So that relies on Revit. And so once our model gets built out, then we're starting to look at different scenarios there. So we're able to sort of straddle like C-scale. We can do some testing. We've also pulled in Beam and used Beam on some projects to test those early construction options or structural options. And then it's kind of funny in between in DD we're doing some jumping back and forth between EC3 and Tally. So but a lot more EC3 and specific product comparisons than I was expecting. So we'll get, now that the client has the bug in their ear that, there's lower carbon options, they want to know, like, are our shower stalls, which shower stalls lower carbon? So we're digging into things like that. And there aren't a lot of EPDs for shower stalls.
Yeah, we use all the tools. I personally use Athena Impact Estimator a lot for our whole building life cycle assessments because it has such a robust data set. I know they're coming up with like a web interface now, so we'll see what they're doing and bringing to the market. I think it's going to be really exciting to see how the market responds to LEEDv5. And if more tools come online or if their tools are upgraded or reinvented. We also use a lot of internal tools that we've built as well, building off of things like EC3. And then we've used C-Scale to do embodied carbon estimates at different stages of the project, or ECOM from SE 2050. There's a lot of tools out there. So I would just encourage people to, jump in, and there's also a lot of education out there too. Various CLF hubs have provided a lot of education that they've recorded and put on YouTube. So when people are just getting started on this, because we mentor SE 2050 firms all the time, I always tell them to, there's a list of great YouTube videos on all these different tools that can be used that have come out largely from CLF hubs. So there's definitely a lot of education out there, and I'm excited to see what's next from some of these tool providers.
Yeah, and we actually use predominantly one-click, especially we have a branch that does a lot of work over in the EU and the UK, and so we're subject to the RICS whole building carbon assessment that they do over there. And so one-click has just like a really good variety of tools for us to do work here as well as on our international projects. So we use one-click, including they have an early stage carbon designer tool that helps us do a really high level analysis of different structural systems for an early design. And then we also do a lot of work with EC3, especially some of our clients do a lot of their carbon accounting through EC3. So there's a lot of modeling that goes through that system as well, just to help with how their internal reporting works.
Awesome. Thanks to everybody on the panel for answering that. So I'm going to start pulling in a couple of audience questions here. There's one that's a little more on, I guess, the USGBC side of things, so I can just quickly answer that. I'm seeing a few different questions about when in design the prerequisite embodied carbon assessment should be done and whether it's a design or construction credit. So while we recommend you do an embodied carbon assessment as early in design as possible to use it for decision making, there is no requirement in the rating system for when it is submitted. And we no longer have the strict definition of design and construction credits because we don't want project teams to decide on pursuing LEED later in the project process, even though that takes away a lot of opportunities. We don't want to put any projects in a position to say, oh, well, this was supposed to be submitted earlier, and now we can't pursue LEED. So I wanted to take that barrier away. So it is fed into, to answer Sarah's question, it is fed into the 25-year carbon assessment, but there is not a timestamp or date requirement for when that is submitted. So just wanted to clear a couple of those up in one sweep. And then this one I'm going to direct to the panel. What are the different ways LEED allows users to define the baseline for whole building life cycle assessment and EPD methods? This is a really hot topic, as always.
Lindsay, I think we actually knew this was going to come up, so we have a list of some of the guidance there. Yeah, yeah, there it is. So this is, I think, officially in the the reference guide, resources for defining the reference building, the ASCE resource, and then some of the Canadian resources, the national guidelines, which build very heavily off of the Vancouver Embodied Carbon guidelines. But I'd say there isn't a big update in terms of information for V5 about how this is defined differently. And I know it's something that USGBC and CLF are both interested in working on. So I think part of my question for this will be to turn it back to the group. We are actually have a survey we're looking to share with CLF hubs and others in our network for a few different projects coming up this year. And one that we are interested in doing is working with practitioners on defining best practices or development guidelines for reference building. So I'm going to put that survey in the chat. So if it's something you're really passionate about, I would encourage you to join us in defining some of those best practices. And I just lost the chat, but oh, there it is. And there are two other ones, whole building LCA related, you'll see on there as well.
All right, I don't see any other panelists raising hands, so I'm gonna shift to another question. So Dalton is asking, I'm seeing the possibility of double counting EPDs or double counting EPDs for path 1 and path 2. So I'm just gonna pull up the credit itself. This is an or, not an and/or for option 2, path 1 and 2.
Yeah, and I'm realizing, Lindsay, there's some fine print under this credit table. You can't get more than one of the pathways for just meeting baseline or industry average. So if you demonstrate through a whole building LCA that your building is better than baseline, you can't also get points for using EPD analysis to say you're better than industry average.
Okay. So hopefully that clarifies that, Dalton. And then
well, maybe actually, Lindsay, just to add a little bit
yeah.
more, and Kelly and others, I know we've definitely talked about this. I think the reason you can get points from multiple options, even though there is some overlap in terms of reductions, is that there is really the idea of encouraging, like as we already spoke to, of starting from the beginning, thinking about embodied carbon reductions in design, and then continuing to pick up points along the way as you also move into procurement. So could you get all of those points just from whole building LCA for procurement reductions and for design? Yes, you can demonstrate it that way. But this also provides a different approach where you could get some reductions from a whole building LCA and also some additional points using EPDs to show some of the more procurement focused reductions you got. I don't know, Kelly, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, no, you've got it exactly right. I mean, you can get points from option 1 and option 2 as long as you're not double counting the points for just meeting industry average. And that is purposeful to encourage people to try multiple pathways, because we think overall carbon literacy is gained when you understand multiple pathways, when you understand the EPD analysis, but you also understand whole building life cycle assessment. So this is a lot about both encouraging reductions, more significant reductions, but also encouraging that carbon literacy across the board. We didn't want people to be scared to attempt the LCA and become more conversant in that by fear of not being able to get points. So this hopefully allows you to take multiple options and multiple pathways all at the same time, sometimes in concert with each other. Yes, the EPDs may help your LCA. I mean, all those things work together, and that's okay. I mean, the worst case scenario, all of our projects all get 6 points in the MR in this credit, and then everybody's doing all the things. So I think everybody doing all the things is a gain for the industry.
Yeah, kind of the way that renewable energy gets to double dip. It kind of encourages it more.
Yeah, do you want to pull up the slide about the double dipping? So reuse is also an area where you can get multiple points. So this is an example of case study or a project that we did. It's completed and it's already certified LEED version 4. 92% of the existing structure was reused. And so that would, if you go to the next slide, then that achieved 6 points total in version 4.1, with just the option 1 building materials reuse pathway. And then for version, if we were to do that in version 5, which we didn't do a whole building LCA, so we're guessing based on history, but we're looking at 4 to 6 points for that embodied carbon reduction, and then the 5 points for building reuse. So you're bumping up to a range of 9 to 11 points. So we're really trying to incentivize that projects like this, where you're using what you can, what makes sense, and reimagining this building. Oh, and I forgot to tell you about the project. The project is a courthouse. If you go back one slide, I've talked about this project so much I forget. It was a courthouse and jail, and so you can see that that podium level was basically impenetrable, and it's surrounded by neighborhood. Context is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it was converted to 3 stories. The podium is now affordable housing units with office space above. And so we had, the facade just didn't work. So we had to replace the envelope, but and we took 2 stories, 2 floors off the top, but carved out some niches and reused everything that we could. So we want to see more of that.
Yeah, and Kelly, do you want to really drive this point home too with your reuse project?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this also goes to double dipping because, in terms of double dipping, this project is essentially double dipping in gaining embodied carbon reductions from reusing steel, in addition to where it will be in LEEDv5 with use of reused steel. So hopefully, all projects like this one can be rewarded in LEEDv5. But this is the Thomas A. Fanning Student Athlete Performance Center at Georgia Tech here in Atlanta. It's a new 100,000 square foot facility on Georgia Tech's campus in the northeast corner of Bobby Dodd. So the construction of this facility required several bays of framing of the existing stadium to be demolished to make way for the new facility. And so during that design, while on site, our engineers from Walter P. Moore saw that some of this steel could be reused in the new building. And they thought it would be the perfect opportunity to introduce material circularity to the project. So they suggested to the team that steel be deconstructed and salvaged for reuse for the new building. Of course, it was so vital that there was buy-in from the entire project team, which included SLAM, DPR, the steel fabricator with Steel LLC, and Green Circle Demolition. And everybody worked together to make sure that this reuse could happen. Ultimately, 25 tons of steel were salvaged and reused. And you can see that steel kind of being pulled out of that existing building and then heading over to the fabrication shop. That fabrication shop was just 10 miles from the job site. Super lucky there. So all that steel did was travel a round trip of 20 miles instead of going through the entire process of being, melted down, reformed, reheated, taken back, refabricated, all the things, right? So ultimately, it saved 25,000 kilograms of carbon emissions, equivalent to driving about 60,000 miles. But we counted for this in our reuse story, but also, in our carbon reduction. So this would count in an LCA as well. So hopefully, we see more of carbon and circularity, playing together to reduce overall carbon emissions.
I love hearing about those projects because it's really inspiring to hear about things like championing using so much of an existing building or direct component reuse, because that's the kind of bringing everybody to the table, making those decisions early on. Just because USGBC doesn't put a timestamp on when you do this work, it's really important that you do it early, that you have conversations and integrate your project team, get your contractors on board, get everybody involved. So I think it's just really exciting to see these project examples that are really going to shine in LEEDv5. And one thing I want to make sure we touch on, so Megan, what's up with the construction points path? Why is it so important to highlight this as its own path?
Yeah, I think it's good to see how the sort of just doing an assessment is moving into a prereq, at least for A1 through A3. But I think we're not, I think everyone knows we're not quite there with A5. And so I'm really excited that LEED is rewarding or awarding points for teams that collect on-site data. I think if you use a whole building LCA tool, you might think, why bother? It's a lower percentage overall of A through C emissions. But from the more in-depth studies that have happened, the percentage range I've heard is that it could be up to 20% of the cradle to grave embodied carbon. So this is a area where we really don't know enough in terms of what the size of the prize is in terms of emissions, as well as opening up a huge range of reduction opportunities once we do have more information. So that's what's up with the construction points path. It's time. It's time for A5.
Yeah, if I could follow up on that too, because so Burns McDonnell has a construction arm, and we are seeing a lot of requests start to come in. Like the timing of this is really good because there's a lot of push from our clients around these questions about job site emissions and that tracking. So hopefully it's kind of like a joint effort where not only are you getting it requested from clients, but then also that helps with, getting points on lead projects and things like that. So helping move the industry forward and really providing that incentive to these construction companies to put the mechanisms in place for this tracking.
Alrighty, so I see a couple of questions in the chat about this, so I'm just gonna address it. So, multifaceted, but where in the BPSP credit does embodied carbon come in? You are gonna see that show up in the climate health section. And I know this is really small print, but if you scan that QR code, it's gonna take you right to that document that speaks about building product selection and procurement. It has this beautiful matrix, which is now many pages from the programs we have evaluated and added on the with the tags, hard work, and commitment, as well as staff. And I will add that embodied carbon is going to show up in EPDs, in climate health, and again, you can read more at the QR code there. But one thing I want to highlight here is EPDs getting points is going to vary based on the optimization. We are not accepting product LCAs any longer. Industry-wide EPDs are also not gaining points in LEEDv5, and that is because we think it's time to take really the next step and optimize our EPDs and just do better with our materials. So, Helen, to answer your question, if you look in that document that is linked here, you will find a lot of different documentation and outlines for required products, multi-attribute that is going to be really helpful in understanding how, from a manufacturer standpoint, you can really optimize those points in building product selection and procurement. And I do want to add that we will also be developing manufacturer specific guidance in 2026 to really push out to help this process be as smooth as possible. But we're looking for multi-attribute, we're looking for optimized EPDs. It's time to kind of push to that next step. And I'm very excited to see where this takes us, because if we think about the impact of before, I mean, nobody was really talking about EPDs, and the amount of EPD generation that we got was really a whole movement. So it's very exciting to see where that's going. So hopefully that document can be a help. Certainly reach out if you have other questions. Let's see. Thank you for adding that in, Megan. So looking at the carbon assessment tools, C-Scale and EC3 are free. Is there a quantity specific tool that's free for those that are newer to LCAs? Or would a whole building LCA not be available without an investment in Tally, One Click, Athena, etc.?
I can answer that. So EC3 is to some extent a quantity specific tool, but yes, it does not do a whole building LCA because it doesn't provide the other impact categories. So you could still do a quantity specific assessment of the embodied carbon of the building. As far as I'm aware, there is not a free tool that allows or that provides that full whole building LCA where it has all the impact categories. But there are that other path where you can do more of the product specific approach to pick up some points.
Isn't Athena free?
Not that I thought it was still had a fee. Last time I looked at it, it had a fee.
Oh, Kelly?
I
Kelly?
can't remember. It might be free now.
The eco calculator was free.
Okay.
I
I
don't
should know
know.
this. I really thought Athena was free. I'm gonna look this up while we're talking. Okay.
I'm looking it up now too.
Pretty sure the impact estimator is, but yeah, they might rename some of the
Oh,
tools.
they
So,
do. So they
yep.
did. Yeah, they have a free web-based whole building LCA tool, so you could definitely give that a shot. Good
Yeah,
call out,
historically,
Megan.
I would, if you want a free whole building LCA tool, Athena is free. I
Yeah,
feel confident in saying that.
yeah.
Thanks for others for jumping in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
there's less, it's more of a spreadsheet based tool. There's less sort of integration with Revit, but it's still a whole building LCA tool, all the life cycle stages, all of the impact categories.
Yeah, and it has a great database that's kept regularly up to date, that they update it all the time, and it's very good. Actually, a lot of EPDs are created using the same database as Athena, from Athena. So you'll find that several EPDs align with the Athena data.
Good stuff. Okay, thanks everybody for chiming in on that. Super helpful to know where to look for the tools. Um, so question from Victoria, do we see a future where benchmarking becomes the trend and we move away from baselines?
We're ready. No, we're ready for benchmarks, but I'll say I don't know if there will be a future where there's only benchmarks, whether in LEED or I think in some policies, I could see the case where it'd be only benchmarks, but for a lot of buildings, that's not going to require, you have to set the perfect benchmark to make sure everyone is doing reductions. And so I would imagine, at least for the near term and probably for a really long time, when benchmarks are introduced, there's going to be an and or an or situation where you're meeting a benchmark, but there's always the opportunity to use a percent reduction. Because if you think about also just the endless number of building types that are out there, picking a relevant number for every single one of those building types is really important. If you don't have a percent reduction path, and that's going to be really difficult. So I think it'd be easier to get there sooner for some building types than others. But just we've actually looked at this some when we're talking with just different jurisdictions. I think about if you look across projects, you're gonna be asking some teams to make massive reductions, and then a huge number of projects aren't going to have to do anything, which I would say is not the spirit of LEED. They're rewarding points for folks actually making reductions. So I would see a either or a both and sooner than I'd see benchmarks only, is my guess.
Yeah, I'm really in favor of the both and, setting the benchmark, but also requiring a percent reduction, just because all buildings are different, and all of you on this call, I'm sure, in the AEC industry, and you know this, right? Like, we have to design every single building, right? The foundation conditions are different. The geotech is different. The wind, the seismic, I'm a structural engineer, so just every building is unique in and of itself because of its situation. So I think it makes sense to benchmark like certain building types, but also require the percent reduction so you can have the project specific discussions. Like, that's really what this is all about, right? It's all about having those project specific discussions that make people uncomfortable, get out of their comfort zone, do new things, right? Explore new materials, like try new design strategies, all the things. Like, if you're not having those conversations, then you're kind of missing the point. Like, this is not supposed to be just an accounting exercise. Yes, we know it's carbon accounting, but this is not supposed to be like somebody alone in a basement, like doing calculations of carbon, right? Like, these are conversations. That's how we make a difference. So hopefully, we all do the calculations, in the end, and we're all running the numbers. But at the same time, it's all about those conversations on your projects. And to me, the benchmark, yes, meet the benchmark, but also like do all the things, have all the conversations. And I think that percent reduction just kind of enables that a little bit more by recognizing that buildings are unique.
But I'd say my addition to my earlier response, just going to pitch this for USGBC 5 years in advance, is I could see a world where the prereq has some kind of benchmark because it's really good at setting the ceiling of cutting out the worst polluters in terms of buildings. And that goes for materials as well as for buildings. But I think it's harder when you're trying to set that aspirational goal if you don't also have the alternative of the percent reduction path.
Yeah, and I think these are all, dreams that we have for the future of LEED and the implementation piece, because like you've heard from every panelist today, getting reductions and building your carbon literacy is really about making better decisions in the end with everybody at the table. And once you're able to do that early in the project process and make those informed decisions, all of the accounting pieces and the analysis comes from that and builds off of that. So we really do want to see those, the carbon literacy be built and the reductions to be rewarded in V5, but then we have all of this opportunity to do stuff with the data in the future. So super exciting. I know we just have a few minutes left. I can ask one last question of the panel if CLF, you all don't have any closing remarks.
I don't think so. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Okay, so of the panel, as rapid fire, we have 3 minutes. What is your top tip for achieving embodied carbon credits in V5?
Do a whole building LCA. And get lots of reductions. Don't just do it. Reduce embodied carbon.
Mine is try all the pathways. Just try them all. Scattershot all of them, do them all.
And look for opportunities to reuse materials. Buy some doors from Doors Unhinged. Do whatever you can do.
Chat early, have those early discussions as much as possible and push for those early design integrations.
And obviously, actually, this is the real one I gave it green bill. Join a CLF hub, but you already did, so I don't need to tell you that.
Oh, awesome. And we again have many resources that have been published and will continue to be published in the new year. A lot of great collaboration with the technical advisory group and with Carbon Leadership Forum. So reach out to us if you have questions on collaboration, or I saw maybe a couple of project specific questions. You can reach out to us about those as well. But we are super excited about this group's opportunity to implement the changes for V5. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining and for all the hub leads who help organize and send out information.
Thank you.